Hearing will come to order. I want to welcome everyone to the Senate Budget Committee today. Today we'll focus on the President's budget and revenue proposals. Our witness today is Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to the committee. We look forward to your testimony. We also value your wise counsel as we have come through some of the most difficult times in our economic history. I believe history will record the steps that were taken at the end of the Bush administration, and the initial days of the Obama administration were absolutely critical to averting a financial collapse. I believe that history will make that clear. And I believe you played a hugely constructive role, as did Secretary Paulson at the end of the Bush administration. I believe the President's budget gets it about right in the first year or 18 months. Even as it moves to cut spending, it continues critical investments in the areas of education, energy, and infrastructure. These near-term investments will help strengthen economic recovery and lay the foundation for long-term economic growth. I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandmother was a school teacher. We called her Little Chief. She was 5 feet tall, but she commanded respect. And in our family, she told us over and over, there are 3 priorities in this household. Number 1 is education. Number 2 is education. Number 3 is education. And she meant it. And we got the message. So I know that she would feel very strongly that education's got to be the cornerstone for future economic growth. But I too take issue with the President's budget in the medium and long term, where I believe we simply have to do more to address our deficits and debt. According to the administration's estimates, the budget brings the deficit down from 10.9% of GDP to 3.1% by the end of the 10-year budget window. So that's the good news of this budget as I see it. The President's budget does make substantial progress in bringing down the deficit as a share of the gross domestic product, which most economists say is the most valid measure. So a very substantial improvement in our deficit path by that measure. Let's go to the next if we can. If we're looking at dollar terms, the changes to the gross federal debt under the President's budget goes from $15.5 trillion this year to more than $26 trillion at the end of the 10 years. So over 10 years, we're averaging an increase in the gross debt of $1 trillion a year. That, to me, cannot be the path. If we look at gross debt as a share of the economy under the budget, we can see it reaches 100% and continues rising slightly throughout the remaining budget window. Why is this important, that the debt is now the gross debt? I want to emphasize the gross debt, not the publicly held debt that you often see in the newspaper. The gross debt, taking all of the debt of the United States, is over 100% of GDP. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because the best analysis that's been done of financial history, a work done by the economists Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff, found this. We examined the experience of 44 countries, spanning up to 2 centuries of data on central government debt, inflation, and growth. Our main finding is that across both advanced countries and emerging markets, high debt to GDP levels, gross debt above 90%, are associated with notably lower growth outcomes for the future. That's why this matters. A debt that is too high acts like an anchor on the economy, reduces future economic growth, reduces opportunity for the American people, reduces job prospects for those seeking employment. So these debt figures are more than numbers on a page. This matters to real people and their lives. It matters to the thing I think everyone around this table cares the most about, which is future economic opportunity for the people of our nation. Make no mistake, we are at a critical juncture. We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. Let me repeat that. This is reality. We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. Spending is at its highest level in 60 years as a share of the economy. Revenue is at its lowest level as a share of the economy in 60 years. Revenue the lowest it's been in 60 years, spending the highest it's been in 60 years. No wonder we've got record deficits. This has to be addressed, I believe, on both sides of the equation. Yes, we've got to cut spending. Yes, we've got to reform entitlements. But yes, we also need tax reform to help reduce the deficit and make America more competitive. We need to be realistic about what's necessary to meet the needs of the nation and return the budget to a sustainable long-term fiscal trajectory. Looking at revenues in isolation has led some to argue that revenues should be held to the historical level of 18% of GDP. That has been the level over the last 40 years. Let me point out, revenue at that level would not have produced a single balanced budget in a single year in all of those 40 years. In fact, on the 5 occasions when the budget has been balanced or in surplus since 1969, revenues have ranged between 19.5% of GDP and 20.6% of GDP. So I just say to those who say, revenue no more than 18% of GDP, you wouldn't have balanced the budget ever in the last 40 years, not one time. The 5 times we have balanced, revenue has been from 19.5% to 20.6% of GDP. I would argue it's going to have to be at the high end of that range given the retirement of the baby boom generation. Fundamental tax reform must be a part of the approach to addressing our fiscal problems. The current state of the tax code is simply indefensible. As a former state tax commissioner and chairman of the Multi-State Tax Commission, I'm acutely aware of what has happened to the tax code, and it is a Chinese riddle. You have to be a contortionist to deal with this tax code. It is out of date, this tax code. It's hurting U.S. competitiveness. It's hemorrhaging revenue. The tax gap, offshore tax havens, abusive shelters undermine the effectiveness of the tax code and cost confidence in the fairness of it. This tax code is riddled with expiring provisions. This creates enormous uncertainty for citizens and businesses, making it difficult for them to plan ahead. If we took steps to simplify and reform the tax code, we could reduce tax rates below where they are today and produce more revenue. Tax expenditures are running at over $1.1 trillion a year. That's as much as all of domestic discretionary spending. Although the President's budget called on Congress to work with the administration to begin the process of tax reform, it did not include any significant tax reform recommendations. I believe the only way we're going to solve the nation's long-term fiscal imbalance is by enacting a comprehensive debt reduction plan. We need a plan in size and scope of what was proposed by the President's Fiscal Commission. Here are the key elements of tax reform that were included in the Commission's plan. It eliminated or scaled back tax expenditures and lowered tax rates to promote economic growth and dramatically improve America's global competitiveness, which needs to be a goal. We're in a different world. When this tax code was written, we didn't have to worry about the competitive position of the United States. We were dominant. Now we're in a tough, competitive global environment, and we've got to be competitive. The Commission proposal makes the tax code more progressive. I was proud that we made the tax code more progressive. The Commission's report included an illustrative tax reform plan that demonstrates how eliminating or scaling back tax expenditures can lower rates. Instead of 6 brackets for individuals, the plan includes just 3, of 12%, 22%, and 28%. The corporate rate would be reduced from 35 to 28. Capital gains and dividends would be taxed as ordinary income. The mortgage interest and charitable deductions would be reformed better targeting those benefits to people that actually need them. The child tax credit and earned income tax credit would be preserved to help working families, and the alternative minimum tax would be repealed. The Commission's plan also increased revenue to 21% of GDP by 2022. That is the kind of tax reform I believe that we need to adopt. Let me just conclude on that point. I've gone longer than I'd normally, but I do think that it was important to lay out some of the elements of what the Commission said and what I strongly believe. And I mean, be quick to say, there are many things that I disliked intensely about the Commission's report. I remember one of my colleagues called me the night before we were to vote and said to me, what are you going to do? I said, I tell you, the only thing worse than being for this is being against it. And, you know, at the end of the day here, we're going to have to put together a package nobody is going to like. It's going to be controversial. Nobody is going to be happy. But it has to be done. It has to be done.